Okay. Hello?
Testing.
Testing. Hi, Mike.
All right. Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. Hi, Mike, can you hear us loud and clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay. We're having
I can
trouble
hear
with
you.
Derek's signal. Mike, nagcha-chop ba yung galaw ko?
Hindi. Smooth.
Smooth? Smooth?
Smooth yung,
Smooth naman?
yeah.
Okay. Sige, sige. Yung kay, yan. Okay. Yung kay Mike, swabe din.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah,
Kay Jason,
choppy.
swabe din yung video kay Jason. Eh, Jason, pare. Ayan. Okay naman yung mga galaw ninyo. Okay, welcome to Blade Chat. So for the meantime, habang inaayos for the meantime, while Derek is figuring out his technicals, how are you guys, Mike, Jason?
Okay lang. Possible call at the hospital, pero baka hindi matutuloy.
Talaga? Bakit
Yeah.
bakit may chance na hindi matuloy? Ano ibig sabihin?
Patient for possible ultrasound.
Okay.
Parang PUI.
Mm-mm.
Kasi it's PCMC, Philippine Children's eh. So, they have a policy not to let the patient into the hospital. Just nandun lang siya sa triage area.
Okay.
Kasi vulnerable population eh. Kaya ayaw nilang ipasok eh. We don't have portable ultrasound to bring the ultrasound out to the dun sa ibang hospitals.
Mm-mm.
So, I'm still waiting on the final decision kung matutuloy or hindi.
Okay.
If they say tuloy, pupuntahan ko yung patient.
Kaya
If not,
for the meantime, tambay-tambay muna.
tambay muna.
Nice. Ayan, Derek's back. Yeah, I think Derek's connection is better now. It's smoother.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Looks good now.
Looks better now. All right. So it's 2 minutes before 10, but we can start now the chat if you have the first time I contacted Derek, I was planning of talking to Derek about vintage knives, vintage folders, because Derek is the person that I go to when I have a question regarding vintage folders, vintage knives, or anything aged and Western. So that's why I contacted him.
Yeah, you can't ask me about any of the Japanese.
So the first few knives that I asked him about was this one. It's Buck 110. And I asked him about this because I wasn't sure if it was a legit one, because it had 4 pins on the handle. Oh wow. 4 pins on the handle, while the usual Buck 110s that I see has only 3 pins. So I asked him about it, and he pointed me towards different resources. So yan. Hi guys, Alabama. Alabama.
Alabama. You got to be careful with this guy. He'll do bad stuff.
Oh man. Ayan, so that's it. Then he pointed me to some resources, and I found out that this was in what 60s. I forgot already. But it's a legit one, and it's an older box. Okay, so now that we are starting the chat, I would like to request the other guys, except for Derek, to mute your microphone unless you have a question for Derek. So let's first mute our microphones and okay, ayan. So that the audio will be uh, not mixed up. Okay, so Derek, how's it going over there in Iloilo?
So far, pretty good. It's nice being in a smaller city because the community really comes together nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of donations going on over here. City's been nice and quiet, safe so far.
You said that when I asked you about the knives, that you said that you left them in the shop. So you are far away from your shop.
Maybe 10 kilometers, but we're underneath the enhanced quarantine.
Yep.
But the risk versus the reward of going to pick up a few knives just isn't really worth it, in my opinion.
Of course, of course. Safety first. Okay. So we begin the chat with me asking you how you started in. How did you start being would you consider yourself a collector? Of course, I think that you will be consider yourself a collector.
I'm a mix because it is about use as much as it is about the looks or the quality or any of the other factors. There's definitely knives that I buy purely for collection only, because they're just either over the top or I don't want to scratch them because they're so beautiful. They're pieces of art.
Mm-hmm.
But I really got started. I grew up on a farm back home in Texas. And so we always had a pocket knife in around us or with us. And we always had an axe and a machete in the truck and on the tractors. So it was more of a matter of this is the way I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as I got older and got more of a budget and started looking into deeper, different pieces, then the collecting bug really hit. And that really started with the Swiss Army knives. But of course, it hasn't been limited to that. This is the pocket knife collection.
Oh wow. That's not a DIY box, right? That's a store-bought box.
Yeah, this one is store bought. We just moved into our new house, so I haven't had time to set up the table saw. Once we get that up and running, then we'll start looking into making some from locally sourced materials.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can bring down the price because these are China made and they still run around 15,000 pesos.
Wow.
Per half. The American quickly jump up over 50,000 pesos a box and go up to 100,000. But I'm hoping we can start making here in Philippines with some local hardwoods, and maybe we can really bring down that price and get it to maybe half.
Okay. And then when you were growing up, was there a point where it's like a milestone that you graduated from um, utilitarian knives and going into the nicer collectible knives and custom knives, or what was your entry point or gateway?
It probably started with custom Swiss Army knives and collectible Swiss Army knives. Victorinox did a bunch of runs back in 2010, 2013 or so, where they released models that they only produced 50 of them at a time. Some of them were only produced to 8 worldwide. So that kind of kicked it off, and it's a slippery slope. You tell yourself, oh, I'll never spend 5,000 pesos on a knife. That's too much money. And then the next thing you know, you start pushing 3,000, 4,000 pesos a knife, and it just grows from there. It gets worse and worse.
What's the worst?
Every time you make it. Oh shit! I don't want to get into that. My wife will probably watch this video and kill me.
Okay.
But one of the is always expensive, and a lot of people sometimes get confused by that. One of the things I love collecting is oversized knives.
Yeah.
So this is just an old Stockman, but whenever it's opened up, you're looking at almost a foot long total size. And if we compare that against the normal Stockman, let's see.
A foot or
here's a Swiss Army knife to compare the size difference.
Oh, nice. That's a commercial run.
But most of these large knives are made in Pakistan.
Made in what? Sorry.
Pakistan.
Okay.
So they're not exactly high-end collectible knives. They're just really interesting to me.
Novelty knives.
Absolutely. Somebody had a question?
Okay. So now we are going to open the mics. If you have questions, this is just a informal chat. Kwentuhan lang, tambay-tambay. I think Derek knows what tambay is.
Was just drooling at the Swiss Army knife you showed. What year was that from?
Oh yeah, this is a 1954 Knox soldier.
Nila? Ay, kukunin na lang. Sige. Hintay sila doon. Sige.
But this one was made specifically for the Swiss Army. It still carries the government stamp on it. And this particular model is back before they changed the can opener style, and they still use the lobster claw and then the inline reamer. So these are a little bit different than what you'll see on the current production stuff, besides just the size and the shape of it.
Guys, wait lang. I'll just fix something.
Go ahead.
Hello? Hello? Ken? Ikaw ba yan?
Oh. Frontliner kami ngayon.
Nasaan ka? Duty? Okay, I think Derek's connection is
Yeah, we
unstable.
lost Derek.
Yeah, I think medyo choppy yung linya ni Derek.
So,
Saying hi to Chris, bro. Pathfinder Gear is listening.
Pathfinder Gear, aka Hot Pocket.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's listening
So,
too.
for the meantime, since kasama natin si Jason,
Yeah.
Bro, Jason, can you show us a bit of what you have there behind you?
Uh,
What's your favorite thing there behind you?
uh, sese. Sese, tapos kinostomize ng wife ko
Nice.
yung scabbard niya.
Nice.
Painted it.
Ayos ah.
There's Derek na.
Supportive si wife.
Yes, actually, itong panabas sa kanya.
Kanya? Alright.
This is hers. I didn't want to pick it up, but when she saw it, she fell in
Wow,
love with it.
ganda.
So sabi niya, you have to get it. I bought it, pero sa kanya daw yan.
Alright.
Tapos the other panabas is mine. I got it from Pinoy. Ito naman yung other version. Medyo use and abuse to kay Pandoy Pulido.
Alright. So, okay. Thank you, bro, Jason. So now we have Derek back.
Derek?
What's up, Derek?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi.
It's okay. So, going back to vintage ones, vintage folders. I think what I have the oldest here is this one. Were you the one who asked before? This one has no markings pala.
When the knives don't have any markings, it definitely we have
Okay. We have connection problems.
Yeah, we're having a storm here. I think that's causing problems with the internet lines.
Okay. So, since we're having technical difficulties with Derek, since you're here, guys, Mike, Jason, Ken, and Chris, ano na lang. Ay, nawala si Chris. Derek.
Show Intel na ba?
Mental, packet dump.
Okay. So, Leatherman Squirt,
Nice.
Top Spartan, and Lumen Top Tool AAA. The reason behind it, marami kaming dinadaanan na checkpoint and mahirap na magdala na medyo
malaki-laki.
init sa mata na gamit. Yeah, bare essentials lang muna tayo.
So, big sabihin ito, duty carry mo to. Kumbaga, out
Yeah,
and about.
pretty much. Yeah, especially in the metro. Kasi, yun nga, mas madali siya makonceal. Kasi it's person-friendly. When you pull it out, no one will get threatened, right? When you pull out the pistol, okay, ganda niya na. And people, sanay sila i-operate versus to some folders na may locks, pinipilit pa nilang so every day, this is yung dala ko. Mas madali paliwanag yun.
Pero so far wala pa namang incident na na neck.
Well, wala pa naman, pero sa my experience kasi, especially when we go out of town or yun nga, may pinupuntahan kaming lugar like sa mga kailangan mo may field carry, most of the time, doon na nag-augment yung carry mo kasi very dynamic yung EDC you carry what you really need, no? So, for example, pupunta kaming field, kailangan mas substantial yung dala mo kaysa dito. So, kung magiging backup mo na lang to.
Si Doc Mike. Mike, pag
Well,
ito... Sige, go ahead. Pag
since
lumalabas ka.
Kapag lumalabas ako,
lalo na ngayon kasi, kumbaga, heightened alert, quarantine, ganyan, daming checkpoints. Pero ikaw kasi...
Parang may kaming dinaanan eh.
Within the city yung galaw ni Mike eh.
Yeah, since I'm a doctor, no major issues really. So yung EDC ko, Pioneer X,
Nice.
Nightcore flashlight. Basically, that's it for my knives. I don't really pack much when I go out. Sometimes, I don't usually bring this. I usually leave this at home.
Mag-out.
Mike, ano yung nasa likod mo na nasa left?
Binangon.
What's that one? Yeah.
This one. Yeah. Iloilo Talibo.
Oh, ganda.
What profile? Right now, I mostly work at home. So every once in a while, I bring out stuff dun sa cabinet to play with. So, although wala masyadong dedalang breaks when I go out, when I'm here sa house, medyo maraming nakalatag sa table ko. So, my Protect Bounty Hunter, Ultra Tech.
Nice.
Parang yung Star Wars inspired ano.
Star Wars team.
Yeah, it's inspired by Boba Fett, hence the name the Bounty Hunter. So this is the way.
Ganda.
Yun.
Okay. Ayun. Sa akin naman, ngayon ko lang talaga nakikarry out and about pag lumalabas ako dito sa community. Dito kasi kalsada yun sa babae. Ngayon ko lang nadadala talaga yung mga ADC na tactical. Yung mga ano. Ngayon ko lang nasusuoto. Kunyari, mamamalengke tapos bit-bit mo to. Yung mga ano, parang normal lang kasi. Kasi dati, pag naglalakad ka sa kalsada tapos bit-bit mo to, parang pagtitinginan ka masyado eh. Pero ngayon, since ang dami namin mga sundalo sa paligid, parang normal lang. So, okay lang, nadadala ko siya. May flashlight,
Normal visuals.
Leatherman, flashlight, Surefire, tapos yung mga usual pens, etc. ganyan. Nagamit ko yung pen kasi nung nakapila ako sa Palawan Express para magpadala ng pera. Nasa loob yung pens.
Yeah, better to bring your own pens now eh.
Oo, dapat.
Kasi
Sharing is...
pwedeng point of contamination din yung mga ibang pens eh.
Yeah.
That's true.
Ay, bro, Jason. 'Di ba, ang dami mo kasing mga tawag nito, yung mga cutting videos mo. Jason, ikaw 'yun, 'di ba?
Yes, Alan. Nag-choppy ka.
Choppy ako. Oh, sorry. Hello. Jason, ikaw yung madalas nagpo-post ng mga cutting videos.
Yeah.
Ano yung sa experience mo, ano yung pinakamasarap na ipang...
What about them, Alan?
So, ano? Nag-chop din yung signal ko.
O, kanina nawala, Alan.
Ayan.
Ayan, better.
Okay. Bro, ano yung the best slashing chopping sword in your experience? Kumbaga yung by design.
That I've tried?
Oo. Or fun. Pinaka-fun na lang.
Pinaka-fun. Pinaka-fun siguro for me, Gaseous Blade.
Mm-hmm.
Blade test niya sa akin kasi to eh. So I did a lot of play with this. Isang hidden tanto at the end. So I did a lot of play with this. So I fell in love with this kasi used and abused. I get different materials, chicken, fish. Basically, parang ginayo ko yung mga forged in fire na mga cutting with this. So I fell in love with this. Pero in terms of yung mga fun, panabas, both styles, I super love. They're super light kasi. And then, medyo mataba yung back ng blade. So you know they're gonna cut really well. Fun to swing.
Yung panabas niyan, that's the TFW one, right? Or Pangasinan?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Pero alam ko may bad reviews yan eh. Kasi...
Oo, hindi nabali, di ba? Ako kasi puro pambukid yung usual na nagagamit ko mga bolo. The ones that I use are for chopping trees and ganyan. Not fun. Well, kind of fun. But it's not the bottle slashing or tatami mat slashing kind of fun. I've never tried it actually.
Actually, before all of this happened, Aldwin and I were talking. So we're gonna do another slash here. So when all of this, if ever all of this blows over, I'll invite all of you guys to slash tayo sa house ko.
Yes.
We'll have bamboo, all of the materials. I'll buy chicken and fruits para fun talaga siya.
The forged in fire run. Nice. Pero
Derek's back.
Yeah, Derek's back. Pero before Jason, Aldwin usually does it in Ram's place, di ba? Ram Makimot and
yes,
also your place.
Kasi maraming si Ram eh. Marami siyang source ng mga bananas at mga bamboos. So Aldwin naman has a source of bamboos dito sa Quezon City.
Mm-hmm. Tsaka yung bamboos ng Kilaram, yung medyo maninipis na variety.
Oo, medyo manipis. So, hindi ka matatakot sa blade mo. Yung mga dala ni Aldwin, medyo kailangan mo ng solid blade talaga.
Mm. Manipis, pero yung inner wall niya makapal.
Yes. Fun to slash.
Mm. Okay. How's the windstorm coming there, Derek?
It's we live out near a farm area, so there's always high winds out here. Even though we have a good internet, sometimes it messes with the wires.
Mm-hmm. So, but now it's very malinaw.
It's calmed down a little bit, but the other issue is we've got 9 people in the house right now.
Yes. And everyone's on the internet.
Oh yeah, everybody's got Netflix and everything else running right now.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you had mentioned a knife with no markings on it.
Yeah. This one. It says USA at the shield, but other than that, nothing else.
Those were a lot of times made by Schrade or Imperial back before they joined up, or another brand called Sword Brand, which is another sub company. The problem with them is that there's no real way to lock down who actually made it. And you actually have to start searching through product books specifically to see which company offered what type of cover on it or how their reamer was made. And even then that can get super confusing and super time consuming.
Mm-hmm.
You really almost have to have a library of the old product catalogs. Some of the ones we keep around is like for Cattaraugus cutlery. We have here in the house, we have Keen Cutter. But at the shop, we have a lot of the old Remington books and a bunch of those. So we can actually go through all of their product line from the 1800s all the way up to the 1960s or so. But needless to say, going through a 300-page book takes time, and then having to go through 10 of them to go through every factory, it can really be a long process.
You can't just type in keywords and
You can, but like what you have right there is a scout knife, and that was made by damn near every company in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So it becomes really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. So, Derek, on top of your head, what are the better brands that you would say that the makers from before?
So, just like anything, we kind of have to talk about budget. Mm-hmm. Because there's going to be a wild variety. Some of the Cattaraugus knives run over 50,000 pesos.
Oh, wow.
And then, so obviously Cattaraugus is one of the top companies, but not everybody has 50,000 to drop on an old pocket knife. Mm-hmm. Especially considering the steel that they used back then isn't as good as the steel that we have today, thanks to technology. You know, we have a much better steel selection today. And our heat treat services are way better than they ever were in the past. Mm-hmm. So if we break it down, if you're really looking for something affordable, Camillus is always a great brand to look at. Mm-hmm. They're not overly expensive. They were produced in large amounts, and they don't have a huge collector market. Mm-hmm. Case was a fairly affordable knife back in the day, and still today their new stuff's affordable. But if you really get into picking up their old stuff, again, you can spend over 50,000 pesos a knife. Same with Buck and some of the other big names like K-Bar. But Camillus is a great place to start. And they have a lot of really interesting stuff if you're really into collecting. Like they did some ribbons for their dealers a few years back to celebrate their 100th anniversary. And they did some shooting marbles and some other stuff like that. So if you're really into collecting one brand, Camillus is a great place to start because there's a lot of material out there for them. Another great option is the Schrade Imperial brand back before they were bought by Taylor Holdings out of China. Very affordable knives. Sometimes you can find those for like 250 pesos in America. Yeah, there's a great option right there. It's a working tool, and it's nothing fancy, but it works really well. It's made from good high carbon steel. And you can usually pick those up for 1,000 pesos to 500 pesos, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm. So,
But another good one would be like Keen Cutter, Cattaraugus, Western, of course, K-Bar, Buck, Case knives. If you can find old ones, Queen Cutlery is amazing, but they can be a little bit expensive. Then you've got like Canal Street Cutlery and Titouette, and just in the 1800s, there was literally thousands of knife makers in the United States because they were trying to separate from the English steel and trying to get away from England as much as possible. So it's really, there's no way to go through it all.
okay. So in
To put,
your history of collecting, those are more source books.
yeah, to put that in perspective, this is the stack we use to, plus we still have more to shop, but this is the stack that we use to keep track of all the different factories just in the US. And this covers worldwide, but most of these are US companies. So this is, I don't know, 1,500 pages right here.
And how often do they come out with those books? Are they still publishing those kinds of books now, or?
There is, but the two men who were really putting out the best information were Bernhard Levine and Richard Goins. Goins is most famous for his book on tang stamps, and it literally lays out thousands upon thousands of manufacturers and their tang stamps. And for the bigger manufacturers, he would actually put in all of their different tang stamps within the book and what years they were produced in. So it makes it really easy if you're looking to age a certain knife to be able to flip through. And it gives you a brief history of each company, maybe 3 or 4 sentences. It's not much, but it gives you a place to start whenever you go to Google and start doing your deep research. Bernhard Levine stopped making his guide to knives back in the 90s. There is a 5th edition that's out, but it's absolute junk. The printing company didn't want to actually pay him to write a new book, so they used all the scrap pieces from old books and pieced together a book and still put his name on it. Even he'll tell you, don't buy that version. It's no good.
So, the books stopped printing in around the 90s, but the information there still stands because most of the manufacturers have already stopped manufacturing. So the information there is still good.
That's right. And not only is it still good, but even the different editions will have different information because they have to be able to change it up every year and make it interesting and have people buy the same book twice, basically. So there will be information in the first edition that there necessarily won't be in the second or third edition. A great example would be in his very first edition, you can see he doesn't necessarily talk about any one particular manufacturer. Instead, what he does is really start to break down each individual model that people would request him to write about. And he would break down how the locking mechanisms worked on different knives and talk about what they were actually for. I thought I had this one marked out, but I guess I didn't.
But all those information, nobody has yet to digitize all these information, right? Nobody has put up the entire book or something, just references, just
Not that Not that I know of. The issue is that these are all still under copyright in the
Yeah.
U.S. for the most part. So it makes it difficult to do something like that without getting the printing press's permission.
Yeah.
And that can be hard to convince a big corporation to release their copyright for you.
Yeah.
One of the, like his first edition, we were talking about, they go into different marking knives and they show the different patterns and different models of the different marking knives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you won't see in the second or third or fourth edition. And so we can actually take an original and go ahead and compare it against his sketches. And he'll actually go into a description of what each model in particular is about. And it's great for some of the oddball knives, like this one from the timber industry. It's not a pocket knife you'll generally see because it was an industrial tool.
That one is used for.
So it really is good sometimes to have older versions. Another one he covers pretty in depth is what we lovingly call a nutter knife. It's for removing the testicles of chickens usually, but it can also be used on larger animals. And again, it's an industrial knife, so it's not something you're going to see a whole lot.
So we can say that really the information on the internet regarding if you're going to research on that kind of particular knife, the information on the internet is really limited.
It's very hit or miss for a lot of especially for the older industrial knives, because a lot of these things fell out 70, 80 years ago. And the people who were using them on a daily basis are gone because most of those guys were our grandfathers or even our great grandfathers in some cases. So it can be really difficult on the internet. It's always a good place to start because there is so much information out there. But if you have some books to start with that can really slim things down and make it easier for you to find the information. Blade Forums and then All About Pocket Knives is another great site with a lot of information on it, especially whenever it comes to tang stamps.
So you being you're vintage pocket knife collector, vintage collector, would you say that the collectors here in the Philippines, the community of vintage collectors, how big is it? Is it would you say
It's still pretty dang small.
Yeah.
It's still pretty demand for it. Part of that is amount of trust that comes involved with all of it.
Okay, Derek signal is
about whenever you've got another knife sitting right next to it that you recognize. It's understandable for people to be a little bit hesitant.
I'm sorry, Derek, we lost you most of the sentence.
Oh,
sorry.
I was saying it's understandable for people to be hesitant to get involved with it because it is a new market here in Philippines for the most part. And with budget being tight for everybody, especially right now, it's hard to just trust a guy who's selling you something that he's telling you the truth whenever you've got another name brand sitting right next to it that you actually recognize that name brand. So the market's still small, but it's coming around, and we've been trying to build it, but it'll just take some time is all.
You're bringing in some vintage slip joints, vintage folding knives. What are your criteria of bringing how you bring them in? Do you choose, or is a bulk thing, or Your favorites?
Some of it we do bulk, like especially the Swiss Army knives. I buy by the kilo. So we get them in. We have to hand inspect every one of them, disassemble them, sharpen them, clean them, go through all of that,
Oh wow.
which is a long, drawn-out process. Now the others I can go ahead and buy usually in small batches of like 10 or so. So I've already got a good idea of what's going to be junk and what we're going to be able to actually clean up and sell. It can be very time consuming because we do have to go through every single knife. And I think right now we have probably 300 slip joints for sale. And that's the other issue, is trying to photograph all of those slip joints and post them for sale and keep all of the pricing straight. It's a headache. But it's a passion, so we're trying to work our way through it. For the most part, though, I do get to kind of choose individually which ones we're going to pick up from different collectors and estate sales, and then we actually import those in. And we do tend to focus, we're trying to bring in more of the middle budget and lower end budget, but we stay away from stainless steels, because stainless steels back in the early 1900s to mid 1900s were really junk for the most part. So we try, if I see it rusted up, then that's the one I want to buy usually, which probably sounds a little bit odd, but that immediately tells me that it's a carbon steel at the very least. And then we focus on Camillus, and we've got some early K-bar and buck knives that we focused on pretty heavy. Imperial, Schrade, Hammer brand, some of the others like that are pretty big names. But for the most part, we're trying to stay more towards the lower end of stuff until people get more accustomed to it. And maybe there'll be more demand later on for higher end pieces.
And most of those stuff are store available in the store only, most of them, because as what you said, it's hard to photograph and to post every one of them.
Yeah, and we bring them out to the shows, of course, whenever we do shows. But now that we're not doing Tax Expo, that really limits our exposure in Manila. We're hoping to still stay with Prepper Bazaar. We really like what Nico and crew is doing over there, and of course, we'd rather support the community-driven shows more than the profit-driven shows. So, and it's always a great time at Prepper Bazaar. Lots of laughs, lots of lies being told to everybody. It's fun. One of the other things we tend to focus on whenever we bring in knives is we tend to focus on stuff that's unusual and unique. So you will see industrial knives in our system. You'll see also standard run-of-the-mill stuff. But like here's a standard run-of-the-mill Scout knife. It is actually pretty cheap. It's generic. There's no real markings on them. If I remember right, these were made by Imperial in Providence, Rhode Island. You can usually pick these up around 500 to 750 pesos. But what really made this one unique to me was this was actually a gift. So back in 1961, if you saved up like 10 popsicle wrappers, you could send it in. This one was 175 coupons from the wrappers. And you could actually send that in plus 25 centavos for the shipping, and they would send you the knife. Normally it wouldn't be that interesting of a knife, but since we were able to track down the actual receipt and everything else for it, it really made it an interesting piece in my opinion.
And you're selling it with the paper?
That one's actually going to stay in my personal collection. But just giving an example of some of the ones we're trying to get in, finding a popsicle list from 1961 took me a long time. So that one's going to stay in my personal collection. We do have others. We had one very similar to this one for sale. This one's from the early 1950s. This was actually a kid's toy set. And it came with like the sheriff's deputy knife and a little badge and a chain to hang it all. We already sold out of the one that we had in the shop though. It's little stuff like that that we look for.
That one particular one with the sheriff star, it looks like new, but is it from the 50s, or is just a reproduction, or what?
It's new old stock. We know that it's new old stock because you can't. Later on, they would actually put the zip code of the factory on the packaging. So we know that this one is pre 1956 because of that. And that's the little stuff that you'll only learn in the little collector groups, the very, very specific collector groups. But this one is new old stock. It just, I guess maybe a business shut down and they just left their inventory in their warehouse. And I got lucky and came across it. So it didn't matter that I had to eat some skyflakes for a while. I had to have it. Pence Canton's not so bad after a week.
Mm-hmm. When you are you personally one up picker kind of guy, like looking around for vintage knives or vintage pocket knives, maybe back in the States? Was there something that you picked up for cheap, and then when you cleaned it up, it turned out to be one valuable uh, knife?
Yeah, I don't have it here, but we picked up, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, our hog splitter. It's about a meter long overall. I think I paid around 3,500 pesos for it at a local flea market. And I didn't know anything
Local
about it.
in the here in the Philippines?
Oh, no, back in Texas last time I was home. I didn't know much about it at the time, and that's what got me interested in the hog splitters. And then come to find out it's about a 30,000 peso knife.
Wow.
Yeah, we got lucky. Honestly, just for scrap steel, it was worth 35. But once we got it apart and pulled off somebody had tried to repair the handles on it and did a really bad job, so we had to strip all that off. And we found a maker's mark, and turns out to be a pretty expensive knife overall. So that one's actually going to stay. We've had a number of people try to buy it from us, but that one's going to stay in the shop as a display piece. But we've got more hog splitters that we've been slowly refurbishing, and we'll probably sell one or two of those a year every year, kind of maybe around Christmas time.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned that you're collecting the vintage knives and going to shows, going to trade, estate sales, and you buy and sell. But do you how many do you estimate is your personal collection that will not go on sale?
Um,
Not talking about value,
I think,
just the number, maybe.
yeah, I think we're down in my personal collection to non-Swiss Army knives, probably around 150 knives.
Wow.
Maybe 100, maybe down to 100 knives total. Now it's got to be higher than that because I've still got fixed blades. So maybe around 100 pocket knives. I think the last Prepper Bazaar we sold off a bunch of my own personal collection. It's just taking up way too much room. We had somewhere around 700 knives at that time, and that was just too much.
700 knives.
Yeah, somewhere plus or minus. More on the plus side, probably. That's why I laugh in the groups when people say you can never have too many. I said, yes, you can. There is a point. I found that point.
But is there a knife that you have that at this point you will never sell? Like for you, it's gonna be an heirloom, or what do you call it? Sentimental value.
Let's see here. Looks like I don't have it here at the moment, but clear out some space on the table. One of the ones that I really would like to hand down to my daughter is, it looks like a really cheap Opinel. It's an Opinel number 7. There's, it's a stainless blade. It's a new production. Oops, I had it upside down. This is actually taken from the El Hermione frigate that Lafayette sailed from France to America in 1780. They started refurbishing it a few years ago and building a second one, and this is oak off of that ship. This is the ship that brought French troops to the American shores to help us fight against England during the Revolution. So this is actually a pretty big piece of history for us. It's literally, Hermione is called the Frigate of Independence, or the Freedom Frigate, because without the French help, we would have never won against the English during our Revolution. So for me, this is actually pretty nice piece to have, even though it's very plain Jane and there's nothing special about it. It's just another piece of oak. But it is definitely a piece of American history, so we'll hold on to that one for quite a while.
For those kinds
and
of,
then
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
For those kinds of knives, history, and for people that don't know the history, when they look at it, it's plain. But do you have, how do you tell that it's a piece of it's important and it's a piece of history, it's a piece of
Well, Opinel being a French company, the French still take great pride in the fact that they helped to establish the United States. And the United States democracy is 100% based on the French system. And in turn, with the Philippine democracy being so heavily built on the United States, it's really interesting to see that democracy was born out of a handful of ideas in France and traveled the world in such few years. And the French take great pride in that. So for Opinel being a French company, they made a very big deal about being able to get their hands on the wood, and they released a certain amount in the U.S. and a certain amount in France, and then that was it worldwide. And then they all come with a little certificate saying that they're guaranteed to come from that. And of course, each one is actually engraved with the name of the ship on there. So that makes it a lot easier too. Of course, I mean, if you sanded that off, nobody would ever know.
Yeah. But it helps, of course, if you have the certificate of authenticity. That's the thing. That's a key.
Yes, sir. Plus, the oak isn't something Opinel usually uses for their handles. It's too expensive compared to their normal beechwood, but it's not pretty enough to actually go into their higher end lines. So that's a really unusual for them to material for them to work with. But going the opposite direction, another one that'll, if I ever get rid of it, it'll take me a while. It's a Dario Soldadovic. He's out of Serbia, if I remember right. Mr. Hot Pockets over there nodding because I talked him into buying one too. But this is his toucan flipper. We had it made with a low fold XHP Damascus steel. And then I talked him into, the first time he did a backspacer made from the same matching steel, and then we did a matching pocket clip and an orange peel titanium with anodizing on it. It's just a monster of a piece, and it's absolutely beautiful in my opinion. So going the opposite direction where we're going more artsy and more high end, this would be one that I'd like to hold on to for quite a long time, but who knows what the future holds for us.
And that's
Of course,
just
if you listen to my daughter, she'll never sell any of them. She says they're all hers whenever I die.
okay. So everyone who's listening, you can just chime in if you want to say something to Derek or to anyone else.
Same thing on the artsy stuff. We've got one from Spain.
Oh,
This is a non-ratcheting, but these are hand engraved. It's really difficult to show the detail in something like this because of how small the engraving actually is. And this guy makes limited that's how I wound up hearing about him. But he doesn't speak so difficult and there's already one of everything that he makes, so it can be very, very difficult to get your hands on them.
hello? Okay. Derek's signal is frozen. Yan, nawala muna si Derek. Mr. Chris Cobo, kumusta?
Okay naman.
Ano yung Luthor?
Anong balita?
Yun ba yung pinakita ni Derek, yung Luthor?
Hindi. Ano yun? Ano yun? Tukan yun eh. Luther, iba pa yun. Hindi niya bibenta daw yun.
Pero ano rin, yung kumbaga high-end costume din yun. Alright.
Tanong mo sa kanya mamaya pagbalik niya. Yung orphan, pangalan orphan.
Luthor Orphan.
Ano?
Search ko.
Yeah.
Luthor Orphan. Nice. Puro one off ko yun.
I saw somebody ask if I had a unicorn knife.
Unicorn, yes.
Did you ever get your fiddleback bow leg something? The chopper? Nawala ulit.
Nawala. Unicorn
He
knife.
said he was been looking. Yeah.
Parang grail knife ba yun, Jason?
Yeah, mga holy grail knives.
May nahanap na yan matagal na eh. Ewan ko kung nahanap niya na eh.
Actually, guys, habang naghahang pa si Derek dyan, I have some knives that I've been dying to find out the value of.
Yan.
Baka alam nyo. Kasi I have my background in martial arts. I'm exposed with different groups. I have some French friends. Tapos they saw my collection. Tapos natawa sila. And then when they went back here, yung dalawa doon, nagbigay sa akin ng mga knives. Sabi, mga knives daw ng grandfather nila na nakatambak lang sa bahay. Alam ko mataas yung value niya. I tried to look for it online pero hindi ko maintindihan kasi it's in French. Languel knives.
Lagwa.
I'm not sure yung ano niya eh.
Pronunciation.
So iba-iba eh.
Ganda.
Kasi mga pocket knives ng grandfathers nila binigay sa akin kasi wala silang mga pakialam sa knives.
Panalo. Ano yun? Lagwal?
Lagwil? I tried to follow the Instagram pero wala ka rin maintindihan eh.
Oo.
I think si Derek, ano yung linya niya yan. Lalo na yung parang yung style ng
pagbalik niya.
Pero yan yata yung may bumblebee sa tang.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. Hindi lang makita yung detail.
Oo. Ganda, oh. Tapos, sino ba nagsabi nun? Merong isa nag-post na ang collection niya, yun nga mga French knives eh. Hindi si Michael ba? Kalimutan ko. Pero kumbaga parang ganun din sila eh. Different provinces, different designs of pocket knives. Parang wala pa nga yata rin akong French. Sa inyo, Chris, kumusta yung Kumusta kayo dyan?
Yung what?
QC ka ba?
Santa Clara, Bulacan. Santa Maria pala. Okay naman. Tahimik. Nakakabili pa rin ng everything na kailangan bilhin.
Hindi pa
Hindi nga kami nahanapan nung
pass.
Pero masunurin ng mga tao dito na lumalabas. Pero nagot ako yung father-in-law ko nakalabas eh. Sa akin nakapangalan yung pass eh.
Pero hindi naman inaano yun eh.
Hindi nahanap eh.
Dito sa amin.
Nag-grocery.
Dito sa amin lahat ng tindahan, tinatanong nila, sir may pass ba kayo?
Ganun nga dapat
pati
sa amin hindi.
7-Eleven, pati palengke. Yung sa palengke, nandun yung mga tanod, nakatambay sila doon. Tapos binablast nila, dapat may pass kayo. Kung hindi, may 5,000 na fine, blah, blah, blah.
Ayos ah.
Pero pagpasok naman sa palengke, ganun din, ano lang, siksikan. Hindi naman siksikan. Pero
Siksikan pa rin.
Yung normal galawan lang.
Yun nga eh. Sana matapos yun. Hirap. QC ba kayo?
Manila ako. Malate. Si Jason, saan ka?
Ikaw, Jason, saan ka?
QC ako, QC. Exact same situation ng kay Alan. Ganun lang din. Kailangan ng pass everywhere you go. Pero pagpasok mo din dun sa area, like sa palengke ko the other day, ganun din.
Ayan. Derek Jason was asking if you have a unicorn knife or a grail knife at this point.
Yeah, it's an oddball one. There's a couple actually. There's a Damascus knife that Victorinox made back in 2008, and they only made like 7 of them or 8 of them, and only one made it to the United States. 3 made it to the United States, and then the rest stayed within the Elsner family. So there's no chance I'll ever get my hands on that one. But Cattaraugus made one back in the 1950s, these wrenches.
Nice.
These are really difficult to get, and they usually run 30,000 to 70,000 depending on the model.
It's just like Leatherman Crunch.
Kind of, yeah, but way before. That's why I kind of laugh whenever Leatherman always talks about how they were the first real multi-tool.
Just because of the addition of the pliers.
Yeah, but we had companies doing that all the way back in the 1800s. We've got one that was made by Triple H in the 1880s, 1890s, and it had a pair of pliers on it as well. But it was more geared towards horsemen than anything in equestrians. So it wasn't exactly a new idea. It's just Leatherman was the first one to really do it on a large scale and make it affordable and decent quality.
Okay. This is going out now.
Now there were lots of companies multi-tools for 100 years before Leatherman came along. It's just they're either making them in small batch, which made the price really crazy high, or they were making them high batch runs, but they're really bad quality.
Jason was asking about values of his knives kanina when you were out. Jason, can you show Derek?
Yeah. Sorry, Derek, I think you were the one who messaged me, who replied in my post before. But I don't know the exact value. These were given to me by my friends. Laguil knives? Laguil? French
Yeah,
knife.
yeah.
Do you know the value of these? I tried looking for it online, but can't find any. Or I couldn't understand.
The value on those particular knives is going to be really hard to establish, because there are a lot of makers that are allowed to make that style. So it can be a little bit difficult to pin it down. However, if a great way to pin down values, especially on old knives, is to go on eBay and search for the knife, but then filter it by sold listings, and then it'll actually show you what the price that it's sold at. Because we all know that I can put this knife on eBay and ask for $1 million, but it doesn't mean that it's actually worth $1 million pesos. So if we go through the sold listings, it's a great way of establishing what the market value is right now on that knife.
Thanks. Great tip.
But if you are
no worries, man.
To look for that particular kind of knife, what are the keywords? Laguiole knife or Laguiole French knife?
Yeah, you'll start with Laguiole. Let's see. I think I have one right here. Oh, yeah. This one is not marked on here since it's Damascus. Crap. Usually they will mark who the importer was if they exported it from France. There will be a mark on there about who the importer or export company was. And then a lot of times there will even be the company's name marked down here on the blade. They'll all say Laguiole, and that's the style and type of knife. But really, they can be made anywhere in the world. There's a bunch coming from China right now that the quality is really junk. And they sometimes try to pass it off as being actually French made. So that's causing some problems as well. Palladio is making some, I think, out of Pakistan, and the quality on those aren't as great. But one of the ways to tell is that snap. That thing is loud, and it will take off the tip of your finger if you are not careful with it. Those springs are very, very strong. One of the other things we want to look for is that V emblem in it.
Yeah.
That's usually a sure sign that you're buying one from France.
Okay. My one question is, how do you take care of those the vintage ones, or the older ones, the older knives? They're made of carbon steel. They're made of the scales usually are stag or usually are wood. General care tips.
Yeah, the stag can be a problem. Stag and bone can both be a problem. They have a tendency to crack if there's too much of a moisture change for them. So if you go from a really humid outdoors, say for 2 or 3 days camping with it, and then you bring it inside to your air-conned room, you can have some swelling and cracking issues. Even this one, it hasn't been brought out very much. I can't get it to focus, but right behind this pin here, it's actually started to have a crack form. It's kind of standard with these designs. One of the things you can do is get you a thicker CA, cyanoacrylate glue, super glue, and peel that crack apart just a little bit and put you a little in and press it together. And then, of course, come back and clean up any that's pressed out. But as far as maintaining keeping it from cracking, it's going to be a little bit difficult to do. Wipe it down with an oil or a wax or some sort of cleaner that will help to keep some of the moisture inside of it. And then the steel, just maintain like normal. I use some steel wool from Ace Hardware, and I put some Singer oil and wipe it down and give it a light polish with the steel wool, and that'll take care of the surface rust and leave a little patina behind. I don't have any here, but Renaissance wax. We sell it in the shop. It's really, really good at cleaning up bone and stag, and even micarta. It'll clean micarta and then help to protect it.
But when the bone, or stag has dried out, how do you put moisture back in with just the oil?
That is going to be tricky, because if you do it too fast, you're going to have swelling problems, and that's going to be a whole other issue to itself. You might start by slowly put a coat of linseed oil on it, not boiled linseed oil, but just real linseed oil that takes weeks to cure. You might try that. The other thing is to slowly bring it back into the humidity and let nature take its course. That's one of the problems we run nowadays. A lot of people run aircon 24/7, especially in their gear room, to try to keep down mold problems especially if they have tents or tarps, and to try to keep down rust. And that can play havoc if you have a lot of natural materials in there as well, because as that humidity drops, the natural materials are going to try to equalize the humidity. And that relative humidity is going to start forcing humidity out of the natural materials, and it'll start to shrink down on you. And if it shrinks down too much, you might get cracks, or it'll just look really nasty. Even with some man-made materials, we can have that same problem. You can see this is another one that's from the 1950s. And you can see where the handle has actually started to pull away from the liner here. Strong enough that I can actually get my entire finger to grab in there. And same on the shield, it started to pull away. And even up inside of here where it meets the bolsters. Some of that's going to be age, and on the older stuff, some of that is because they didn't expect people to still be buying these 70, 80 years later, so they use some cheaper materials, and they actually start to give off their gas. They start to off-gas. And you have to be careful of that, because if it is in storage with other knives, that gas is very, very corrosive. So actually, if one knife starts to off-gas on you, it can ruin every knife in your storage. So it's best to go ahead and pull those if you can and separate them from the rest. So on cases like that, there's not a whole lot that you can actually do about it. That's just the material being the way the material is going to be.
But how do you know if that's like the gassing out material?
Well, for starters, you'll be able to smell it. Yeah, and there'll almost be like an oil starting to form on stuff around it, and that's that gas actually collecting. 1 second here. The knives with clear handles on them were worse about it. Like these here. With these clear scales on them, they were more likely to off gas because the UV rays bothered them a lot more. Whereas the darker scales tended to survive a little bit better. But you can see that we've still got good clarity on this one, which is unusual for one that started to off gas. But you can see at this back pin, we're starting to get some corrosion underneath it all. And if it's sealed off from oxygen, that shouldn't be happening. So that tells me that this one's actually starting to off gas. And we can see where the piece actually shrunk at the pin and started to separate at the very top right up there. So there's definitely telltale signs that it's happening. You can see how it started to shrink at the back here and up around the bolster. But a lot of times you'll actually be able to even smell the gas itself.
Very interesting. And I've also heard about celluloid being
Yeah,
used,
these would be celluloid.
and they are highly flammable, or
Yeah.
some, just what I've watched a video on YouTube. Before, they used celluloid to do plastic ornaments or jewelry type things, and then they catch on fire and they quickly burn the whole dress of the person or something like that. So celluloid has been used also in knives.
Yeah, it was such a cheap alternative back in the 40s and 50s and 60s that, you know, a lot of these knives were selling for 50 pesos, 30 pesos back in the day. So they had to make them as cheap and as affordable as they possibly could. So a lot of times they used the celluloid in. And since they were a 50 peso knife, nobody expected people to still be using them 70, 80 years later. So they didn't plan for those kinds of failures down the road. I was looking for one of these cards I have somewhere around here. It's actually marked like knives 99 cents each. So that'd be 49, 50 pesos, somewhere around there.
If it was sold today, I mean, in today's money,
Yes, sir.
cheap.
Yeah, and because of that, they couldn't use high quality steel. They couldn't use high quality scale material on them. So the covers were made as cheap as possible, and also even the advertising. I mean, this is how they would actually be displayed in the store, and just and then some cheap elastic bands. And they didn't expect them to last. They didn't expect people to use them, or to use them so many years later. So they would do it as cheaply as they possibly could. But of course, they would also still, in many cases, try to mimic. Let's see. So this one is pure plastic handle, but you can see they actually still try to almost do it like jake bone or a wood pattern. But then they left it plain black. So I don't know what they're actually going for, but this was supposed to be a boy's knife. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't expect an 8 or a 10-year-old boy to be able to hold on to a knife for very long. So these were made really as cheap as they possibly could do it. But the fact that they're still here 80 years later and they were made as cheap as possible, that does speak also to the quality of the manufacturing, even though.
And even the snap is very strong on that one.
Yeah.
Even if it's a cheap,
yeah, which is unusual because this one's been stored like this for years. So that springs have been under tension for years and years. But we do actually still have it snapping open and closed. So we know that at least the spring was made from really good material, if nothing else was. That's one of the things that I personally love to still collect is the old sales posters and how they would have the knives displayed. Because for me, going into the feed stores and the gas stations in the US, every knife was sold on these bright colored backers, and they were all super cheap. And as a little boy, I always wanted to buy my own, but I wasn't allowed to, or I didn't have money, or I was only allowed to carry my Swiss Army knife. So now that I'm an adult, I spend way too much money trying to buy all this stuff I wanted as a kid, I guess.
But you're happy at the end.
Yeah, as long as I can hide it from my wife for a few months. Problem is now she's starting to hang around the store. She knows how much this shit actually costs.
So she would know how much she would sell it.
For a lot of the stuff, yeah. She sees the value in the shop, and she sees how much we ask for certain stuff, and she figures that if I'm keeping it for myself, it must be even more valuable than what we sell in the store. But she also understands that a lot of this stuff, everything that we sell in the store, we use. I need to be able to justify selling it to other people and know that it's good, and I need to be able to talk to people about what's good and what's bad about it before we can actually market it.
Mm-hmm.
So we test almost every single thing that we sell.
Does your wife have her own knife? I'm assuming she has her own knife.
Oh yeah, she's got quite a few. My problem is she likes those Pachymascus knives.
Okay.
Drives me up a wall. She loves Pakistani Damascus knives because they're so pretty. But you know, whatever makes her happy, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just happy she wants to buy the 1,000 peso knives and not the 10,000. But yeah, knives are part of our family very much. We even had Schrade Imperial do this one 2 Christmases ago for my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So the knife is a custom Swiss Army knife with a rounded tip on it.
Mm-hmm.
We had to bring in a special model from Russia because that was the last place I could find that actually had it in stock with the scissors on it.
Mm-hmm.
The Wenger style scissors, because they needed to be able to work with the Wenger style body that we put on it. And then I had another friend, Matt Peterson of Voodoo Resins. He made us some custom scales and had it all shipped over to Wacky, and Wacky actually shaped the scales for me. And then we had Schrade Imperial do the custom leather holster for us, and picked up an old Christmas edition lumen top tool from Lester Lampa. And then in the shop, we took scraps from the scale material and turned down a custom bead for her on the lathe. This really became an all-around project. I think we had 5 or 6 shops involved in total, and it was really nice being able to see the community come together and get her a Christmas gift. My wife tells me I'm spoiling her. I tell her I'm investing in her retirement.
Yes.
I figure maybe she'll have to date a rich man by the time she's old enough to date, because she won't be able to accept the gifts.
It'll be picky.
But yeah, we all have our own knives. Jen, my brother-in-law, who works for us, he even started making some wooden knives for his sons so that they can have their own little EDC to carry around with them, so that they can be like their daddy and Tito Derek.
Okay. Now I've seen you making the scales. You're right. You're making the resin scales.
Yeah, we've gotten tired of selling other people's work and watching Kershaw make all of the money and Buck and everybody else. And we decided we're going to start our own production, and we're starting with resin scales first. So here's one where we still haven't quite put finished polish on it yet. There's a few scratches that are still in it. But this was a Hunter XT that we're doing for a customer. We did violet. I know on the camera it looks far more purple, but in the sunshine it's violet. And we did a apple green combination. No glow in this one, just violet and green. But it's absolutely coming out gorgeous. In all honesty, I don't even want to send it to the guy. I want to keep it for myself. But because we're doing it in-house, we've been able to do a lot of experimentation and come up with our own unique color patterns. We're about to release one that's yellow and red. We're going to name it COVID.
Oh.
See if we can start up some problems that way. But we're like, this one's actually pure yellow in the resin dye, but then we did a green glitter inside of it that I just bought from the hobby store. Everybody here thinks that I'm buying makeup for my daughter or something, but no, it's all going to my knife shop. But because of the green glitter, the yellow really turns a crazy color green, and it always changes color depending on the light.
The light.
Same, we're doing another one that we're probably going to wind up naming manga. But we've got some green and silver paper that we've been casting into a yellow resin, and you get a really unique and different pattern every single time because of that. If you can't tell, I really like green and yellow. We've of course been doing other colors, but like here's an orange and black set that we did for another customer. He wanted it to be mostly black. It's not something that we can really control, but it still came out quite nice. But yeah, we're even working on a Christmas pattern that we'll release like once a year on a custom knife out of our shop. Lots of different options, and that's what makes this nice, is that even if somebody orders the exact same color combination, they will never be exactly the same. They'll always be different. So no matter what, you'll always have a custom piece. And what we're hoping to do is come up with a couple of patterns that we can keep in-house just for ourselves. But we're going to start supplying to some of the other local makers, especially down in Cebu. We've already sent them quite a few blocks to start testing and practicing on, so that when they're ready to buy some, they'll have the confidence to spend the money on it.
But then the next step will be you producing the blades itself, right?
Yeah, we can actually put the scales on any knife that a customer wants, and we're working with Don Dempus, and we're in talks with Miguel Reneses and some other local makers, which, by the way, has always been our big push. We always wanted to work with local makers, but I'm anal whenever it comes to quality control, and that was always kind of a big issue here. Is makers are rushed because they are living hand to mouth, and I understand that, and they're pushing out as many pieces as they can. So we always kind of held off, but now the quality of workmanship's really stepping up locally, So we're trying to work with some of those local guys to start supplying us with blanks, and we can start putting our handles on it. And of course, we can supply them as well. The other thing, we do have a steel shipment coming in. I don't know what's happening with that now that all this is going down, but we will be 100% making our own designs here in-house. And so that will, our next step before we have our own designs coming in will be setting up our own micarta presses. And once we have micarta and resin rolling, then we'll start going from there. We've been stabilizing wood and bone and other stuff in-house for a while now. So after we get all of our 3 major handles down, then we'll start working towards the knives themselves. That way we can market the handle material to the current makers and of course to the current users who might want something interesting on their knives. And we can get that revenue flowing now before we have to spend months trying to get the knives themselves up and running.
Very nice. Looking forward to that. Even I know Don is very particular about the process. He's posting it from time to time. The hardness and how stringent he is on his make. He's actually bringing it to a testing center. His knives.
Yeah, he's working with, I believe, DOST there in Cebu to actually get everything tested, and or a batch at a time. He's having some tested, if I understand correctly. Not trying to put words in his mouth, but he's trying to get his heat treat process for each steel and each thickness correct. So instead of testing every single blade, he's making a run and then have those tested, and then he tweaks his heat treatment from there based on the results that he's getting. And that's why we're so excited to work with him and some of the other guys, is because they're actually applying a scientific approach to a lot of it. And that makes me very happy, because that means that the quality can only dramatically improve from there whenever we actually start using the technology that's in front of us to its full extent. After all, what's the point of having it if we're not going to put it to work?
Actually, Don is listening in right now.
Oh, he's listening right now?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go. Is that what you're doing? Was that right, Don? Are you running like one batch and then having that tested to get your heat treatment down for each steel type?
Actually, not by batch. Per model, because per model I have different thickness of the blade, different grind type. So I will normally do heat treat on the 2 same design, different. At least I have 2 different blades of the same model. I will heat treat it individually, different settings on my oven, and then have it tested individually on the DOST.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty close. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's what we need. We need more makers pushing it like that, and maybe we can see a dramatic increase in local production. Heck, maybe we can start giving Malaysia a run for their money. You've got those guys selling right now. That's their bullets are 7,000, 8,000 pesos each. You know, I don't see any reason why local makers here can't be doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. Actually, it's a dual purpose. The main one of the main purpose is to really know what's the hardness of for each blade depending on the intended user. Number 2, which is the actually my main reason, because if you notice, I seldom sell knives, because every time I sell my knives, the anxiety that I felt for weeks that like very much worried about if really the knife performs, or maybe I will get a feedback from the client, from the client. So at least with this test, I will know personally for sure that how hard is the blade, if it's the hardest is actually uniform. Because one thing also with if you have a makeshift forge is that you won't get uniform hardness on the blade. So that's also why I'm trying to not really perfect, but try to achieve at least to have uniform hardness any part of the edge of the knife.
And that's what we really need is we need makers taking extreme pride, extreme ownership in their product. If you make and you don't feel a little anxiety that your customers are not happy, then you know, it might be time to consider changing professions, because at the end of the day, we work for our customers, and we need to make sure that every single one of those customers is happy with the product that they're receiving. So it's good to hear makers taking that step and taking that kind of responsibility, and knowing that they are beholden to their customers, because their customers are paying their bills. Their customers are putting food on their table. And you know, too many businesses here in Philippines, their business owner used to everything that's buying a product from you. So it's nice hearing even small-time companies and small-time makers taking those steps to ensure that their bosses, their customers, are getting the best product in.
Yeah, agree. Okay, that's why I also I right now I choose my customer not because of it's more on the user. I mean, the one who buys my knife actually uses it, because I get to get feedback, just like if Derek Alan noticed that several times I asked him how's the knife, what's your feedback, because those are actually inputs on the coming from the field, and how to further improve my knives. And that's also the reason why I don't mass produce at the moment, because if I'm going to do mass, I mean produce several related, it must be according to the standard that I set. Yeah.
I just picked up Brandon's knife from my shelf, and I saw that it's cracking, so I oiled it.
Cracking the handle?
Because of the humidity, maybe. Yes, the handle is cracking. This is the 007 prototype that you did.
Yeah.
Is it a wood handle on that?
It's wood.
Yeah, it's a Magkuno unstabilized. I don't think you can stabilize Magkuno. It's too dense, and it's a bit oily.
Yeah, it's oily. So I'm oiling it also.
That's why we've kind of stayed away from some of those like Magkuno and what's the other one they make all the arnis sticks out of? Tiger Camagong.
Bahi?
It's because those things need to air dry for years, really, at a time, to be able to adjust the relative humidity between the inside of it and the outside world. They won't show drastic change on like a camping trip, and it's because they are so dense that the humidity is not going to play an issue with them. But over time, they will slowly dry out. Our rule of thumb is for hardwoods, every inch of thickness is 1 year of air dry. So it takes a long time with hardwoods to really get them. If you can't stabilize them, or you're not going to stabilize them, it can take a very long time for you to air dry woods to put on a handle. I believe another knife maker had an issue with that, and they had probably 80% of the knives that they made in that batch crack because of that. They used green woods. They didn't give it long enough to actually air dry before they started putting it onto their knives.
Yeah. So is it possible, Derek, if like for example, the magkuno or the kamagong, if we're going to put in a vacuum and then instead of a resin, we put a real linseed oil for deep penetration. Is that possible?
You know, I don't know. I've been kind of wondering the same thing. The issue that we have with putting stuff like that under vacuum is that we're actually going to aerosolize the oils, and we can create a very, very hazardous situation because some of those oils, especially linseed oil, is extremely flammable. So I don't know what will happen whenever you actually put that underneath vacuum and you start pulling those fumes through your vacuum itself. You may very well be creating a fire issue. I'm not sure. I do know that other people were using Minwax and some other stuff under vacuum. But that's something that you really need to be careful of because not all oils can handle being put underneath vacuum without combusting.
So what I do right now is that although I use boiled linseed oil, for hardwoods I soak it at least 3 days after it's already installed in the knife, and then soak the handle part of the knife in boiled linseed oil for at least 3 days.
And that'll definitely help for sure. But if you have the space and if you have the time and let's face it, the budget, because it's not cheap to air dry wood for years at a time. And to have that money invested in something that you can't use immediately. If you have the time, it would be best if you can just go ahead and let those hardwoods air dry for a few years. If you can't, you might look around for a kiln dried a service locally that will allow you to basically rent their kiln. I don't know if there still is one. I know if you're really going to follow the laws on doing that, you need to go get permits from DENR and guarantee the authenticity of that tree and where the wood was actually harvested. And it's a big, long, drawn-out process. And getting the government involved in anything here is a big, long, drawn-out process. So it might be best if you can. Maybe now would be a great time to experiment. Set aside a piece of magkuno and a piece of Kamagong and open it up in 2 more years and see how it looks.
Okay. Guys, if you have other questions, you can just chime in, unmute your mics, and let's chit chat.
Question though, is there any downside to killing curing wood?
It depends on the size of the wood, and it depends on how fast you're actually doing it. You might get some splits or some cracks that form during the process. But for the most part, no. All of your lumber, if you go to like Wilcon or somewhere like that, you buy 2x4s. Those are almost always kiln dried 2x4s. So you're not really causing an issue as far as structural integrity or anything like that. We're just speeding up the process because if we air dry it, like we were saying, it'd be about 1 year per inch. So if you're doing say a cutting off of a ring, as if you had just cut a ring out of the tree itself, that could actually take you a number of years to have it propped up with nothing on top, nothing on bottom, nothing around the sides, trying to get good even airflow around it. And that's how they're going to stack it up in a kiln. And they're not going to cook it so much as they're going to bring it up to about maybe 95 degrees centigrade up to about 105 degrees centigrade, just enough to start boiling the water out of it, essentially.
Mm. Well, so far right now, I'm still doing a no-no on wood, but it did come up to mind because my kiln is 2 cubic feet in size, so I can fit it in there. I just don't know if I'll burn it. I haven't really tried.
Now you do need to be careful because there are certain, like we were just talking about with the vacuum, there are certain woods that give off a toxic gas whenever you heat them up inside of an oven. So you could actually poison yourself if you're around that oven. So it's really best if you can do it outside. I know it's hard to do here in Philippines because there's so much humidity, there's so much rain. So you'd have to time it for the correct season. I don't know, maybe that's something you can find online if that particular kind of wood is toxic whenever you heat it up.
Hey, Duke,
Question.
Duke, do you mean you have a kiln for wood or kiln for heat treatment?
Pardon?
You mentioned you have a kiln. Is that for
Yeah.
wood or for?
Wood or for steel? For the most part, it's steel. I run gears through it, shears through it, but it can fit. I can control it down low to even over 100 degrees. I think that's the lowest I can get it down to. But for the most part, I just use it for steel. The very first time I tried it is for stainless like N680 and D2, but I haven't really tried it on wood.
I'm curious. You bought that locally or bought it abroad?
It's already here locally. It's from manufacturing hub that shut down, but I did have to rebuild the power supply for it because it is pretty damn big. That's why every time I use it, I make sure that I batch it with other gears that need to be treated from other manufacturing hubs in Caloocan to at least make my time worthwhile. Otherwise, sometimes in order to get it down, I run it for up to 8 hours. So that's a lot of money on my part. So I need something to fill that space in because it is 2 cubic feet in size.
And see, running a kiln that small in wood's not really going to be very economical because I just don't think you'll be able to dry enough wood and versus the amount of electricity that you're going to wind up heating up. And that's always a big concern here because the price of electricity is so damn expensive.
Yeah.
But you were talking about like we're going into production earlier, Alan. That's what why we kind of started expanding into bringing in belts and resins and other stuff is not only to help the local makers, but we need a steady supply of it as well. And we just became a dealer for cactus juice, which is the main ingredient in stabilizing wood. And then we just became a dealer for Alumilite. So as far as I know, we're the only dealer. I know we're the only dealer for cactus juice in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're the only dealer for Alumilite really in the Philippines as well. I could be wrong on that. But we're trying to work with some of the local makers. Even if budget's tight, we can always do a trade where, you know, we take 2 blanks for every belt or something similar to that idea. Of course, that's not quite fair. We would work something a little bit different than that, but we're always welcome to work with local makers, especially the smaller the better. We always try to focus on working with small businesses and helping them succeed because that's where the community is actually going to grow. It's from individuals, not from, you know, we can't expect SM to come in and grow our community for us. We have to do it ourselves.
So you've been stabilizing wood recently?
Yeah, we've mainly been working with red Mallee burl out of Australia here lately. I found a woodworker in the U.S. who had a bunch of scraps he wanted to sell. And lucky for us, scraps are about the size of a knife handle. So we've been stabilizing those and getting them ready. We're hoping to make an announcement about it next month or so, but our vacuum pump shit the bed right before all of this happened, so I haven't been able to get a replacement for it. So stabilizing down for a little bit. But Don's actually so hopefully, by the end of this summer, we should be able to have stabilized woods imported for right now. But we're still looking a little bit aggravated because the plaza right across from our shop just cut down a bunch of woods and threw it in the trash. They wouldn't let me take any of them, suckers.
Sayang.
Have you tried dyeing them?
Not yet. That's on the to-do list. We're tackling one problem at a time. Just like Don was talking about, we've actually stabilized quite a bit of wood in the house, but that's something we want to tackle for a few months and know that we've 100% got it down before we actually start selling it to other people.
Okay. Guys, we're
Steels are coming in.
Sorry, Raster, you were saying something?
Alan? Yeah, Alan,
Can
you let, this is a good question. Can you let Derek answer that first before we cut off?
Which one?
Steel. Yeah. I don't know where we're at with steel right now. We've been trying to get it in, but with warehouses and shipping lanes in the U.S. messed up and warehouse shipping lanes here in Philippines messed up right now, your guess is as good as mine. We want it in pretty badly, and what we're going to focus on is high carbon steels like 1084. 1080, 1084 will have an extremely easy heat treat. We just bring it up to non-magnetic and then throw it back into the fire for a few more seconds, bring it up to about 1500 Fahrenheit, and then you can quench in peanut oil. And it doesn't even have to be fresh peanut oil. You can use canola oil, vegetable oil, peanut oil, whatever. So that means local makers can actually go to their carinderia and they can buy some used peanut oil or beg and borrow some used peanut oil and just use that for heat treat. So that's going to be our big focus, but we'll also be bringing in 1095, 1075 for large choppers, most likely, 01 tool steel, and 16 CRB. I can't remember off the top of my head. We have a list already built at the shop.
Got any stainless coming in?
Not at the moment, just because heat treat on that's really difficult. And a lot of the makers don't have the capability to handle it, and we have to order in a minimum steel length or a total weight. So it makes it difficult for us to bring in some oddballs that we can't easily sell to other shops. But that doesn't mean send me a private message. Maybe we can work something out.
The ones coming in, are they already precision ground?
No, we will have. They won't have scale on them. They'll be flat, but they won't be precision ground. So I know you already have a surface grinder that you got to get up and running still, I think. And Don's got a surface grinder, so maybe Don can help out with some of the local makers there and say, maybe some of the local makers can get in touch with you and see about having you grind it out for them for a price, of course. Well, Alan, did we go over your time?
No. I'm just I'm sorry. We're running 2 hours. We're already running 2 hours. So Derek was concerned before if we were going to fill out the 2 hours long conversation, but now we're already going to 2 hours. It's okay to extend. It's okay to chat a bit, but I would like to, for the sake of better wording, I would like to wrap, get a wrap up from Derek. Derek, you have been in the knife community or the blade community, collecting and selling at the same time. What keeps you going, Derek? No, no. What is your why are you passionate about this stuff, blades, knives, and the community, basically?
Part of it's self-serving for damn sure. I mean, I've got a bit within the community, so it because that increases my business. Um, and so I can't claim it's all just from the goodness of my heart. But for the most part, I also like the people that are within the community. As a foreigner, sometimes it can be hard to make adjustments whenever you move, especially if you're going all the way halfway across the world. Not that it's my first time, but so I kind of found a home within the community and made a lot of really good friends. So part of that plays into it, and part of having your hands in something fresh and helping to develop it, guide it, and grow it, and see it continue to improve. That's reward in itself. By um, whenever we first got involved, there was what 5 knife shops, and then we kind of got started up, and Chris got started up right around the exact same time, and Forge opened up I think like a month after we did, and what 5 years. Last time I counted, we were at over 2 knife and emergency supply shops, and that's an amazing thing because especially in this country we have to have that because we between typhoons and coronavirus and earthquakes, and it's not a question of if we're going to need these supplies, it's a question of when are we going to need these supplies. And unfortunately we can't always rely on the government. Even in America we can't rely on the government to take care of us because that is a large operation with a lot of moving parts, and we need help now. We don't need help in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We need help now, and we have to be responsible to our own families and to ourselves to be able to provide that help for ourselves and not wait for other people. So that's been a big push in it, and a lot of it for me came from there's a lack of materials, there was a lack of knowledge, there was a lack of products on the local market whenever we first got started, and I know Chris felt the same way. That a lot of the stuff that we wanted to be able to take care of our own family during times like this right now just wasn't available, and that spurred a lot of it. Or if it was available, they wanted 3 times the regular price, and that was just too much. And it looks like I lost connection again.
No, it's okay. You're good.
Oh, okay. If we're always trying to rely on other people instead of ourselves, we're not, especially as a married man with a family to take care of, and there's 8 other people that I'm responsible to. And I don't know how I can look my daughter in the eyes and tell her I actually love her if I'm not also setting aside food and water every day and getting ready for things like this that we know is going to happen every single year. And especially for those of us that live out in the province and not inside of Manila, we know that whenever big things like coronavirus hit, we're going to be forgotten in favor of Manila and Cebu, because that's where most people are at and that's where the seed is, and that's where the power and the money is right now in Philippines, is really centered inside of Cebu. We know for damn sure that we have to be as self-sufficient as possible, because it might be a long time before we see any help. I know that's a bit of a long-winded and answer of why all of us are in this community to begin with, and why so many of us have stepped up and tried to help develop the community and help grow the community.
Hello?
Hey, did you lose me again?
Oh, we heard you, Derek.
Okay, maybe it's on my end that I didn't hear the last part. Actually, the last part of what Derek said, but I think we got the gist. But for my recording, this will be my signing off. Yeah, thank you very much, Derek, for giving us time to interview you and for showing some stuff and for teaching us so many things. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you so much, guys. If you still have other questions for Derek, you can continue the chat if you want.
My Wi-Fi seems to be going to crap again. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not.
Can hear you.
Yes, can hear you.
Ah, okay. I can. I could hear somebody talking, but that's all I could hear.
Okay, so maybe that is our cue.
Do what, Alan?
Maybe that's our cue to end this meeting. Thank you so much to Derek for giving us a time and giving us your expertise on vintage knives and how to take care. And generally, thank you for all the information that you've shared with us. And thank you for everyone who listened and participated in this Zoom meeting, Pinoy Blade Chat episode 2. Thank you, and I will stop recording now and continue the chat.
Thank you for putting it all on, Alan.